Hello, and welcome to another edition of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. So, what's the deal with the high school 3,200 meter race? All right. The 3,200 meter race, uh, which is also known as the metric mile, a rough equivalent is the 2 mile race, is on a 400-meter track. It's 8 laps. Indoors on a 200-meter track, it's 16 laps. Generally speaking, it's one of the longest distance races you're likely to come up against in high school. Now, there are other distance races that are longer, like the 5K, the 10K, but those are generally run in college. Not so much in high school. You could run into those races, sure, but the 3,200 is pretty much about as long as it gets for high school distance runners on track. Now, the 3,200 is a long race. You could be talking about a race that takes, anywhere from 10 minutes to 15 minutes to run. Because of that, the high school race organizers know that if you're not involved in this race, you don't want to be spending, half the day waiting for the 3,200 races to get done. So they try to minimize the number of 3,200 heats there might be. So in the 3,200, instead of the usual number of heats, let's say, 3 or 4 or whatever, you may just have 2 or 1 heat. And that's because it's a long race. And, the meet organizers want to cut down that time. If you had 2 heats, let's say, of the boys and the girls, that's 4 races. You're talking about something that could potentially take an hour to complete. That's a big chunk of time in a meet. So they try to minimize the number of heats for the 3,200. So because of that, you may end up with a lot of competition in your particular heat. They may try to place a large number of runners in the 3,200 and maybe limit it to 1 heat. So it's possible that your race could have 18, 20, 22, I've even seen 24 runners in your race. And now, that's unfortunate because that's really too many people in a race, and that causes problems with blocking and log jams on the track, and now you're going to have to spend time passing people, and that eats into your overall finishing time. In an ideal world, what kind of race would you have, right? And if you wanted to run a PR, ideally you'd only have 2 runners, right? You'd have somebody who's slightly faster than you, leading you like a rabbit, and you, 2 runners, right? A rabbit is somebody who runs in a race, who's there to only lead the pack to make sure they run faster. So give somebody for the runners to chase, and then they bow out of the race before it finishes. They disqualify themselves, and their time doesn't count. So ideally, that's the ideal race. You got a rabbit, and you got you. However, I've never seen that happen in any high school race. Never seen it. What you get is you get high school races typically It depends on the popularity of the race, but it could be anywhere from, a handful of runners to even like a couple dozen. Sure. Um, Now, maybe some of your high school dual meets or tri meets, maybe you're only talking about 2 or 3 runners. Maybe even just one. Or maybe nobody's running, because that can happen. The 3200 is really a race that many runners just don't want to run because it is very long. I mean, you're talking about running 2 miles on the track. That's tough. Tough. Yeah, sure, the pace is slower. The overall pace is slower. But it's a tough race. It's a long endurance race on the track. And a lot of the runners, they're just like, well, I don't want to do that. That's really hard. I want something easier. I want to run, 1600 or the 800 or the 400 or whatever, or sprint or whatever. 3200, oh, woohoo! Don't ask me to do that. So 3200 runners are, they're a special sort of runner, a special breed of runner, because most of the runners don't want to touch this race with the 10-foot pole. It's a tough race. So the 3200 does present a great opportunity for a distance runner because there's less competition. Fewer runners want to run it. Would they be good at it if they did run it? Who knows? Maybe. But it's such a long race, just in high school especially, that there's just fewer people that are attracted to that kind of race. And, the coaches themselves don't particularly like that race because it's a long race. And they got to stand around for 10 or 15 minutes waiting for the thing to finish. And then maybe you got the boys. So it might be a half hour before the 3200s are over, even in a dual meet. Plus, some coaches, they're just generally more attracted to shorter races or sprinting. They're more exciting races to watch. People are running faster, sometimes as fast as they can. They're shorter. They're just, as far as spectators go, they're just more interesting to watch than a 3200. I mean, a 3200 is like watching paint dry. It is such a slow race. The pace is very slow, and it takes a very long time. It may only get interesting as far as the spectator is concerned, at the last lap, when you got 2 girls or 2 boys going at it and seeing who's going to win it or not. But it's a very slow race. Now, that's one of the things about the 3200 is it's such a slow race that there's really no need to push the panic button if you're a runner in that race at any point, really, except maybe the very end. In terms of passing runners in the 3200, wow, you got a lot of time in that race to get up and pass somebody. But as far as like bunching up of runners, far less likely to happen in the 3200 because there's just so much time in the race, so little need to really do that and bunch up or you jostle for position. You can take your time getting into position in the 3200 race. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't get out to a fast start like you do any other race and use that lactic energy, that nervous adrenaline energy that you get at the beginning of a race. It lasts about 8 seconds. Use that to get off to a fast start, as usual, because that's the kind of energy you either use it or lose it. So you might as well use it. So you get in the position of 3,200, but the 3,200 is not one of these panic type races. You make some mistakes at the start of the race in the 3,200. You've got plenty of time to fix them. I mean, this race can last 10 to 15 minutes. So don't panic. You can fix it. Don't panic. You got time. You can fix it. Now, what's a good time in the 3,200 or the 2 mile? Now, according to milesplit.com, these are the elite times for the 3,200 and the 2 mile. Now I'll go through this with you. Silver elite times. Now this is the time that will get you the interest of a maybe D1 mid-tier or low-tier school, or a D2 or D3 school, as far as colleges are concerned. So indoors, 3,200, girls 1146.5, boys 948.5. Outdoors, girls 1120 flat, boys 940 flat. Gold elite, that's the time where a high-level D1 program is interested in you if you can hit a gold elite time. In the 3,200 indoor girls, it's 1121.7. Boys, it's a 932.5. Outdoors, girls is a 1055 flat. Outdoor boys is a 920 flat. I'll give you the numbers for the 2 mile as well. Silver Elite 2 mile indoors, girls, is an 1146.5. Boys is a 952 flat. Outdoor girls in the 2 mile, silver is 1123 flat. Boys is a 943.5 flat. Over on the gold elite side, in the 2 mile race, girls indoor is an 1125.68. Boys is a 935.9. Outdoors for the 2 mile gold is for girls is a 1059 flat, and boys is 923.5. That should give you some idea of the times you want to hit. If you're a serious runner and you're interested in being recruited by a college track and coach or a track and field team. How do you train for the 3,200? Well, the 3,200 is a very long distance race. As far as the percentages of aerobic versus anaerobic energy that you use during a 3,200 race, the 3,200 is 87% aerobic and 13% anaerobic. 87% aerobic. That's almost all aerobic. In comparison, the 5K is 92% aerobic, 8% anaerobic, and the 10K is 95% aerobic and 5% anaerobic. So, the 3,200 versus the 10K, 87% aerobic versus 95% aerobic. That's an 8% difference. That's it. So, from 3,200 to 10K, the 10K is almost 2.5 times longer. Well, wait a minute. Sorry. No. That's 3 times longer. Yeah, 3 times longer. So it's only 8 percentage points higher in terms of aerobic energy, but it's 3 times longer, right? So the 3200 is an extremely aerobic race, and considering how much shorter it is than a 10K, the amount of the aerobic percentage really drops off as you get into the longer races. The 3200 is a really aerobic race. I mean, in a sense, it's comparable to a 10K. I mean, this is really aerobic. And what does that mean? That means most of your energy is coming from uh, energy processes that use oxygen. So it's using the oxygen you're breathing in during the race to produce the energy that you're using during the race. And that's to be expected, because if you've ever seen a 3200 and you see how slow the pace is, you can surely believe that. Yes, most of that energy is coming from the oxygen that these runners are consuming during the race itself. I mean, even the 1600 is significantly faster than the 3200. Because oxygen consumption is so important to the 3200, your training really needs to focus on VO2 maxes. How much oxygen can you bring in and absorb into your bloodstream? And the lactate threshold is extremely important, right? How long can you put off that buildup of lactic acid? Because it's a long race, right? So to go through such a long race, you really need to hold that lactic acid off. Because you imagine in the 3200, if you go out too fast in that first lap, and because of that, your lactic acid is shot up. Those hydrogen ions are burning. My God, you've got you've got 7 more laps to go where you're feeling the burn. Wow, that's tough. You're gonna have a horrible time. You might as well almost just run out of bounds and don't even bother finishing the race, because that's just going to be torture for you, and your time is not going to be good. So, you got to be really careful in the 3200 that you don't spike your lactic acid. At any time in that race until the very end. Maybe the critical zone of the 3200 is the last quarter of the race. So maybe laps 7 and 8, you're going to take off, and maybe that lactic acid is going to start to build up. But you do it sooner than that in this race, you're in trouble, big trouble. And the rest of the race is going to be torture for you. So don't go out too fast in the 3200. In the 3200, so what you're training? So you got to focus on the VO2 maxes, the lactic threshold. But speed work still is important, because there's the start of the race that you got to run fast, and then of course there's the end of the race, the critical zone, the last 2 laps, where you're running much faster, and of course you're sprinting for the finish line. So speed work is still important in the 3200. However, when you train, you can't train and focus on every distance race there is. You got to focus on one or the other. Let's say you're around the 800, the 1600, the 3200. You're going to race those. Okay, but you still have to focus on which one are you going to train for, because training for the 3200 is very different than training for the 800. The 800 there's a lot of speed involved in the 800, and it's a short race. And the 3200, there's hardly any speed involved, and it's a very long race. And how you train for the two can be very different. The 800, you might be doing a lot more speed work at shorter distances. And the 3200, it's slower training, longer distances. So, but you have to decide, which race are you going to focus on? Which are you going to train for? You can still race the other ones, but what are you going to focus on? All right. So let's say you focus on training for the 3200. Well, that training for the 3200 is kind of like training for cross country. It's a long race. 3200 is a long race. Now, the great thing about the 3200, of course, is that because the pace is so slow that you don't really need a whole lot of inherent speed, sprinter speed, to run that pace. So a lot of people can run the 3200 who otherwise couldn't run great sprint times or maybe the faster middle distance races. But it's the endurance aspect that where you have to focus. And not everybody has the same endurance, the same ability to run even a slower pace. But for 8 laps, that's the trick there. People do it for 1 lap, but can you do it for 8 laps in a row? Wow, not many people can do that. And it takes a lot of training and conditioning to be able to do that. So, it's a different sort of training, different sort of athlete. Oftentimes in the 3200, the types of athletes you'll see are shorter athletes and skinnier athletes. Now, why is that? Well, because it's such a long race, there's a big advantage to being lighter as a runner. You weigh less. That means you weigh less. You don't have to carry as much for such a long distance. That makes you better at endurance. So who are the lighter runners, right? Well, the shorter ones are certainly lighter, and the skinnier ones are certainly lighter. And you may find that typically the 3200 is run by shorter, skinnier runners, right? They got both of them. They're short and they're skinny. Very, very light runners. That really helps in terms of endurance. Now, does that mean you have to be short and skinny to run the 3200? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I just want to clue you in on, the fact that weighing less helps a lot in an endurance event like the 3200. There's also advantages to being tall as a runner. Taller runners have a longer stride. They can make up ground much faster than a shorter person. So there are advantages to being taller, even as a 3200 runner. But the lighter, smaller runners also, they can compete. They really can in the 3200 because they weigh so little. Imagine this. You weigh 20, 25 pounds more than the shorter runner. That's like that's like carrying a backpack on your back with a bowling ball in it while you're running. That's gonna slow you down. Right? And the other runner, the shorter runner, they don't have to deal with that backpack and bowling ball, or maybe 2 bowling balls they got to run for 2 miles with. So it can make a difference. This is one of the reasons why before the big meet, you might want to go on a crash diet, lose 10 or 15 pounds, 6 or 8 weeks before the big meet, because that can help you, especially in endurance races or cross country. And then once the race is over, you go back and eat again and go back to your normal weight. I'm not suggesting that you develop an eating disorder or anything like that. Just 10 or 15 pounds before race day, and then you go back to what your normal weight was. That can help you. You don't want to do more than 10 or 15 pounds, though. That's not good. That'll make you weak. But, you crash diet 10 or 15 pounds, that can help. Get one of those bowling balls off your back, right? That'll help. where every second matters, that'll help. Okay, so if you run a slower pace, you like the slower pace, and you can keep that kind of endurance, maybe the 3200 is right up your alley. As far as college recruiting goes, if you run a gold elite time in any event, there's going to be D1 college coaches interested in you, and that includes the 3200. Don't look down on the 3200 because it's a long race and not as exciting, let's say, as a 400 or a 200. As far as college coaches are concerned, they can score the same points with the 3200 that they could score with the 400. What difference does it make? So to them, you run gold in the 3200, they want you. So it's just as good as any other event. Don't look down on it. It's just longer, and it takes a different sort of training to get good at it. So, what might you want to do to train for race day? Well, let's say you have a goal time in mind. My 3200 time, I want it to be 11 minutes. Well, all right. So maybe when you start your training, you start breaking the 3200 down into 400s. All right. So you're training with 400 repeats. Okay. So let's say you do 8 repeats of 400 meters, which adds up to 3,200 meters, and you run those 400s at your goal pace. If you want to run in 11 minutes, what's 11 minutes? Divided by 8, and that'll tell you how fast you have to run this 400. So you run those 8 400s at that goal pace. Maybe you rest in between, or it's a slight jog. Maybe it's a 200-meter jog, and then you go into another 400, right? And so you're starting to put together a complete 3,200 at your race goal pace. So maybe a couple weeks later, maybe a month later, I don't know. Once you've been doing that, those 8 400s, you go to the next one, which would be 4 800s. So you're getting closer to a full 3,200 run. So now you're running those 800s at your goal pace. So it's 11 minutes divided by 4, whatever that time is. That's what you want to run each of those 800s. And then maybe another couple weeks go by, maybe a little longer, and you do it again. You do it again. So now you're running 2 complete 1600s. Your workout is now 2 complete 1600s, and you take 11 minutes. You divide it in half. That's a 530. So you're running each of those 1600s at a 530 pace. Maybe you're doing 400 jog in between, or maybe you're resting. So you're getting closer and closer and closer to what that goal time is. And then, at race time, you just run the race as if you're not taking breaks in between your repeats, but you're going at that goal pace. And now you're running your goal pace during the actual race, and you run that 11. That's one way to train for it. However, that's part of your training, but you can't forget that it's also an endurance event. So you better have your VO2 max workouts and your lactic threshold workouts, your tempo runs, and you better have your long days, and you better have your weekly mileage, because it's an endurance event, and you really need to build up those miles and that endurance to be able to run a 3,200 well. Okay. So let's say you're in the 3,200 race itself. The 3,200 is such a slow-paced race that it's really easy to know what you need to do to hit your goal time. So you say your goal time is 11, and you divide that by 8. So whatever that time is, that's your lap time on a 400-meter track. If you're running indoors on a 200-meter track, then you take that 11 and you divide it by 16, and that would be your lap time. But let's say you're outdoors, you got your lap time, and that's really all you need to do is make sure each of those laps, each of those 8 laps, is at your lap time. You can have a coach or a parent or somebody on the side of the track, maybe the inside or the outside of the track, yelling to you what your lap time is each time you go around. They got to watch, and hopefully they synchronize the time with the start of the race. They look for the smoke of the gun, and they hit the time. And then they watch you pass the starting line each lap, and they hit the split time. And then as you come by, they read their watch, and they yell out to you what your lap time is. And you need to be very consistent in a 3200. You don't want to deviate from your pre-established lap time by too much. I mean, you pretty much want to hit it each time. That's how you're going to maximize your 3200 time. At the end of the race, there's always a sprint for the finish line. So maybe at the 200-meter mark left to go, you start sprinting. As a distance runner, you do that by opening up your elbows, maybe at 110 degrees instead of the usual 90, and then you're moving your arms as fast as you can because your legs will keep up with the speed of your arm movement, and you're sprinting for the finish line. You may even have to do that a little bit earlier than 200 meters to go or 100 meters to go, maybe because you got to catch somebody who's further ahead. And if you don't start, if you don't make your move in time, that person's going to cross the finish line before you get a chance to pass them, and they win. But most of the race is a pretty slow pace, so you got a lot of time to see what people are doing, especially the people in front of you, and what you may need to do to keep up with them. It's important in the 3200 race to know who you're up against. Who are these runners? What's their PRs? What have they run in the 3200 lately? Last week, the week before, whatever. Give you an idea of what they're capable of. And sometimes in these championship races, people always run their best, or maybe they've tapered for it, and they can drop a lot of time unexpectedly in a championship race. You may think, well, this person's PR is 11:30. They get in the championship race and they drop 20 seconds. They ran 11:10. You're like, well, where did that come from? That was their PR. And you weren't expecting that. Maybe you wanted to chase this person this entire race so that you could get an 11:30. Well, now they're running 11:10. You didn't see that coming. So you gotta pay attention to your lap time in the 3200, because if you're chasing somebody and that person is going a lot faster than they typically do, then you may have to hold off and stop chasing them, because unless you're capable of running an 11:10, chances are you're not. But maybe you are. You're going to kill your race if you continue to chase this person who's much faster. Your fastest times, your PRs, usually come when you're chasing somebody in a race who's slightly faster than you, and you're running the race fresh, meaning it's the first race you've run that day. If some of the runners in the race are much faster than you can't keep up with them. Those aren't the people you should chase for your PR. They're just going to take you out at too fast a pace, and that's going to bring up your lactic acid levels, and you're going to hit the wall during the race, and then you're not going to have a good time, especially in the 3200. I mean, it's such a long race. You hit the wall at, say, lap 4. Well, you still got another mile to go, even though you feel terrible, and you're running in slow motion because of all the lactic acid, and you got to do this for a mile. Oh my God! So you have to be really, really careful about going too fast for you, going past your predetermined lap time. So don't let. So you got to know which runners in the race are just too fast for you. Let them go. Otherwise, they could drag you into that lactic acid slow motion run forever, and you don't want to be in that. That's terrible. So you want somebody who's slightly faster than you. Now, if you don't have anybody in that race who's slightly faster than you, well, then you're going to have to do it yourself. Okay, you're going to have to maybe take the lead in the race, or basically maybe there's somebody who's like really fast and they're just going to go in that race, and you're not going to chase them; they're just going to go, and that basically leaves you by yourself, trying to motivate yourself to keep going. One way you can do that in a 3200 is by focusing on lapping people, and lapping people means that there's a runner you're approaching in a race who was originally behind you at the start of the race, who never got in front of you, but you're just catching up to them. I mean, they're running so much slower than you are that you've almost run a complete entire lap ahead of them. So you're getting to the point where you could be coming up on them and lapping them and passing them. So you ran more than a complete lap further than they have. That happens a lot in the 3200, a lot, where runners get lapped. And a big reason for that is the race organizers like to jam a lot of people in the 3200. So you'll get a much broader, spectrum of fast runners and slow runners. So, you could have a great 3200 runner in your race, who's going to run an 11 or something like that if she's a girl. But the worst runner in the race, you're lucky if they broke 13. I mean, that happens because they jam so many runners on there. They're not going to break it into heats because they don't like waiting around to see another 15, 20-minute race. So you end up with the good and the bad in the same race. And that means there's going to be oftentimes a lot of runners to lap during a race. So you can use that to motivate you. So you're chasing down somebody in order to lap them. Gives you motivation. And then once you lap that person, you look for the next one. Who's the next person you can lap? Then go after them. It's kind of a cheap thrill to say, oh, I lapped so many runners in this particular race. Or, ooh, maybe I lapped somebody twice, right? Wow, that's impressive. Of course, for that runner, it's they'd rather forget about the fact that you did that. But for you, it can be very helpful in terms of motivating you to continue to run at your predetermined pace, especially later in the race. So you lap, you end up lapping as many people as you can. And of course, when you're passing, the 3200 is a slower race, but don't get lured into the idea that it's okay to run in lane 2 for an extended period of time, or lane 3. Remember, those other lanes, those further out lanes, when you run in those lanes, you're going to be running a longer total distance than you otherwise would have had to. So make sure when you lap somebody or you pass somebody, even in the 3200, you do it quickly. You don't let them know you're about to do it. You come up right behind them, go around them quickly, and then take off in front of them. Because the second you come up on their side, they're going to see you out of the side of their eye, and then they're going to start speeding up because they don't want you passing them. So you got to do it all quickly so they don't even realize you're doing it, or you're going so fast that they're not going to bother to try and stop you from passing them because you're already going too fast. So go zoom right around, boom, in front. But don't take a lot of time passing them and running in lane 2. That's additional distance you have to run. That's going to cost your final time. So, especially in the 3200, you want to stay as close to the left-hand side of lane 1 as you possibly can, because that's the shortest overall distance, the shortest circumference around that track, and it'll give you your best time. Other issues in races like getting boxed in, for instance, much less likely to happen in the 3200 because there's so much time in the 3200 to get around people that you need to get around. And runners don't group up as much in the 3200, at least, shoulder to shoulder grouping, or, you got people right behind you kind of grouping where you might get boxed in. It's usually more spread out. You might see a grouping of individual runners behind each other. But other issues that you may find in the middle distance races don't really arise that often in the 3200 because it's just a slow race. Now, the 3200 is a distance race. It's a pure distance race. It's not a middle distance race. 16 and the 800, those are middle distance races. So what do you want to do in a 3200? You want to stay as close to the left edge of lane 1 as you can. And let's say you're chasing somebody. You got somebody in the race who's slightly faster than you want to chase. So what do you do? This is lane 1, lane 2. So again, generally speaking, you want to be running on the inside left edge of lane 1. Not in the middle, not out here, right hand edge near lane 2. You want to stay here, the left edge of lane 1, as long as you can. Okay, so let's say you're chasing somebody. Oftentimes runners may be told to to run on the right shoulder of the runner in front of you. Okay, that's really, that's a situation where here's the runner here, and maybe you're running over here. You're on their right shoulder. That's sort of a situation that you're going to find more often in sprinting or middle distance races, perhaps, where you want to chase somebody, but you also want that option to pass them as you near the finish line or wherever in the race, or maybe you want to extend your elbows and block some of the people behind you, so you're running on their right shoulder. But the 3200, it's not a sprint. That sort of situation would only occur, maybe in the last 100, 200 meters, when you've got to pass this lead runner at some point and try to win the race. Okay, so then you might want to be on the right shoulder. But generally speaking, you don't want to be on the right shoulder because you're running further away from the left-hand edge of lane 1. You're going to end up running more distance if you're here than if you're over here. Okay? So, generally speaking, you don't want to do that, except, of course, again, when you're going for the finish line and you know you're going to have to pass this person. You might do it there. So when you're chasing somebody in the 3200, you're right behind them. So, let's say they're running right here. Okay. Well, you want to run right behind them. Right behind them. You're not so close that you're breathing down their neck and you're pushing them to run faster, because then you might go off your predetermined pace, your lap time. But you want to stay right behind them, and you can just look at their back and try to synchronize your footfall with their footfall, and you get the benefit of their draft. So the wind
the wind is coming this way, and they're blocking it to some extent from hitting you. So you can benefit from that. Less wind resistance. Especially, let's say it's on a windy day, that might be very useful. But generally speaking, there's a little bit of less wind resistance when you're running here. Uh, just like trucks on a highway, you see one truck and there's another truck right behind him, and he seems like he's tailgating, right? But what he's really doing is he's taking advantage of the draft of the first truck. It's blocking all that wind, so he doesn't have to. So the truck becomes more efficient, uses less gas or fuel, and the other truck is driving in that first truck's draft, taking advantage of that. And you can do the same thing with a runner. So this is where you run right behind them, synchronize your football. Don't spook them. Don't make them run faster than what the pace you want. But you're also close to that left edge of lane one, and you just go with them. And you don't let people in between you and them. Right? You stay close enough so other people won't be. Maybe there's another person who's up here, and this person is passing them. And as that person's passing them, you go with this person, and you pass as well. And you don't let this other person in between you and that leader, because you let another runner in between the person you're chasing and you, and now you got a problem, because that other runner, chances are, is going to be slower. And now that person's going to block you and slow you down, and that's the last thing you want. So you stick with that person you're chasing. You make sure nobody gets in between you and that person, so that you can maintain that pace and chasing that person. And if somebody does get in between you guys, then get around them, as fast as you can. Get back in behind that person you were chasing, as best you can. Now, if that other person is stuck to this leader like glue, or they want to chase this person too. Well, okay, if they're running fast enough and they're chasing that other person, and it's a good enough pace, well then okay, maybe you can chase that person who's between you two guys as well, and then you can all run the same pace as a group of 3 or a group of 4. Yeah, you can do that. But if that person in the middle is going too fast, you got to get around them, or you're gonna hurt your overall time. And if you can't slip in between the leader and them, don't stay out on the second lane because you can't get back in. You're gonna have to do something different. Like, you're gonna have to get in front of that person that you were chasing, and start taking the lead yourself. I mean, what other choice do you have? Maybe the person you were chasing, once you get in front of them, realizes, oh, well, I can't have this. And then suddenly they take off and try to get around you. And then you're back behind them again. And so is the one who got in the middle is gone. That sort of thing can happen in a race, especially a slow race like the 3200, where a lot of this can develop very slowly because you have a lot of time to make these movements. The 3200 is on a 400-meter track is 8 laps. And it's roughly divided into the first mile and the second mile, or the first 1600 and the second 1600. Now, oftentimes a coach will analyze what you did in the 3200 based on your split times for your first mile, your first 1600, and your second mile, your second 1600. Maybe they want you to run a negative split. Maybe they want your second 1600 or second mile to be faster than your first. Who knows? I mean, it'll be between you and your coach what they're interested in, how they want to analyze what you did in the 3200. You don't have to do it that way. You could also look at each individual lap and what your time was. Because after all, when you go into this race, you should have a goal lap time. So that somebody can tell you each time you come around, hey, how long did you take on that lap? That's very important. You better be doing that in the 3200. You better have somebody there telling you what each of your lap times are, because you got to stay consistent in this entire race. That's how you do well. So you really need feedback on how fast your last lap time was. Was it too slow? Was it too fast? Was it too fast? So I got to put the brakes on a little bit, or was it too slow and I need to push it now a little bit more, get back to what the goal lap pace was. 3200 is very important. Very important to know what your lap time is for each of those 8 laps as you're running the race. Hopefully, you can get that information from a coach or a parent on the sidelines, or maybe there's a display that you can read that allow you to do that. But you want to maintain that consistency, and that's a real important piece of information you need to know while you're running. So, the first mile is the easier one. It's your first mile. You get off to a good start. Your first lap time should always be probably your fastest lap time of the entire race, because you're starting. You're starting fast. You're running fast. You're using that adrenaline. So your lap time is, it's going to be a tad bit faster than your other lap times. It might be 2-3 seconds faster, something like that. Your last lap should also be your fastest, or second fastest, because you're sprinting for the finish line. So some people have kick, some people don't. If the person has a lot of kick, that last lap the time may even be faster than your first lap. If you don't have a lot of kick, this is probably your second fastest lap in the entire race. But you should be sprinting for that finish line. The first mile is going to be the easier mile. It's the second mile where things start to get tough. And this is the key to the 3200. Whoever does well in the second mile does well in the race. This is where people start to get tired. And this is where you really have to push it to do well in this race. And these 2 laps, especially 5 and 6, that's where runners really die right there. And you need to push it in those 2 laps. That's the key to the race right there. You can push it during those 2 laps. You're in good shape. Now remember, it's an 8-lap race. And depending on your strategy, let's say you're the type of person who will lead the entire race, then in order for you to win, you need to create as much distance between you and the person behind you as possible. And the way to do that is you add some distance each lap. So that by the end of the race, you got this big distance that this person can't possibly run fast enough with their kick to catch you and pass you before you win the race. So it's a cumulative process. Each lap you're adding to that lead. So each lap is important, very important. You can't make up a lot of lost lead on any given lap. It's cumulative, so you got to make sure each lap counts. So that's why you hit your goal pace for each lap. Each lap has got to count. It's an 8-lap race. Picking up the lead you're supposed to pick up in 5 and 6 is very important. That's 2 laps out of this race. That's a quarter of the race. That may be the difference between winning and losing. So this is where you push it in the 3200. So this is where you make your move in the 3200. You generally can make 2 moves in a race. Um, your first move is going to be at the start. It's always at the start. Where's your second move? There's your second move. Beginning of lap 5, push it. Or if you're chasing somebody, there's a good chance they may make their move at the beginning of lap 5 too, at the beginning of the second mile, and then you go with them. If you're really if you're a sitter and a kicker, for instance, and you're just staying with somebody and you're waiting for them to make their move. When they make their move, you go with them. Right? You go with them, and then later in the race when you make your final kick, that's where you beat them. But you got to be careful if you're chasing somebody and you want to beat this person. When they make their move, you may make your move when they make their move. You're watching for that. Oftentimes that's right here, beating mile 2. Now 7 and 8, extremely important. This is the end of the race. This is going to determine who wins and who loses. This is the critical zone. It depends on your strategy. If you're a sitter and a kicker, you're sort of holding back but chasing the leader the entire race. Depends on how much distance is between you and that leader. If there's a lot of distance you have to make up to win this race, you may have to start your kick in lap 7. If they're that far ahead of you, hopefully they're not that far ahead of you, but if they are, you may have to start in lap 7 so that you have enough time left in the race to catch them and pass the finish line before they do. Let's say you haven't let too much distance go between you and them, then lap 8 is probably where you're kicking. You're starting your kick. Now, if you're in a race where there isn't anybody who can really compete with you, maybe there's hardly any distance between you and the leader, almost the entire race, maybe 10 feet or something like that. And then you can hold off until, the last lap before you start taking off and pass them and go for the finish line. Now, obviously, remember that you have this great kick, but they're gonna start running fast too. So you still need time to get way past them and hit that finish line before they do. So maybe you start in the final lap as opposed to maybe the 200-meter left mark or 100-meter left mark. A lot of it depends on who your competition is and what your strategy is as a runner. In the 3200, you got to be careful that you don't forget what lap you're in. It's a long race. On a 400-meter track, we're talking, that's 8 laps. That's a lot of laps. On a 200-meter track, we're talking 16 laps. It is very easy to forget what lap you're on. You're running 16 laps. So try to remember what lap you're in. Have backup plans in case you can't remember what lap you're in. You have your coach or a parent on the sideline who can yell to you, hey, 2 laps left, or you're on lap 14, or whatever it is. That can be very helpful. Or maybe the officials are telling you as you go around what lap you're on. But these are a lot of laps. This is a large number of laps. It's very easy to forget what lap you're on. And your strategy is going to fall apart if you don't remember what lap you're on. Especially, your strategy for the end of the race. You may think you have another lap to go, but the truth is you don't. This is the last lap, and you didn't make a move. And you didn't win the race because you thought you were on lap 15 when you were really on lap 16. That can happen. Or sometimes in the 3200, it's such a long race, and I've seen this happen, where runners get lapped by better runners, and those runners, the better runners, they finish the race. And then the runners behind them who got lapped, they don't realize that the race isn't over for them. They got lapped, or maybe they got lapped twice. So the leader, finishes the race, and maybe they see this and they think, oh, the race is over for me. No, it's not. You got another lap, or you got another 2 laps you got to run. And I've seen runners, forget about the fact that they're not done, and then they stop. They stop after they pass the finish line. You think the race is over for them, and it's not. They got another lap or two, and then all right, they're disqualified because they stopped. They went off the track, and they think the race is over for them, and they're just wrong. Just wrong. Got to be careful you make sure that doesn't happen. 3,200 is a long race. Weird things like that can happen in long races like this. The 3,200 is really a specialist's race. A lot of the runners who run the 3,200 really only run the 3,200, or maybe they run the 16 and the 32. So the competition you're going to go up against may have a really good understanding of how to run the 3,200 well. And maybe they focus all their training on the 3,200. And maybe you don't. Maybe you run other races too, the 800, 400. Maybe you run relays. And you got to have some respect for the people who run this race well. They know a lot about that race, and they train for it specifically, and they're specialists, a lot of them, and they can beat you pretty easily and soundly because they focus on this race, whereas maybe you don't. So have respect for the people who run the 3,200. Not only is it a really tough race to run, but you could be running up against people who know a lot more about the race than you do. So have respect for this race. Maybe you want to specialize in the 3,200. And you can be one of those runners. But have respect for those 3,200 runners. Yeah, they may look like, short, skinny runners. But don't kid yourself. These people take this race seriously. And if you don't take it seriously, you're going to get beat bad. Okay. The relay is interesting. There's distance relays that you can run. I'm not aware of any distance relays that involve 3,200. But there are distance relays like the distance medley relay. You could run a 1,200, 400, 800, and 1,600. So the mile would be in that relay. Or you could have the short medley relay, which involves say 8 and 4 and maybe a 2. And there's other relays like a Swedish relay. But the distance races can also be combined into relays. So distance runners also have that option of running relays on track. Now, relays can be fun. It's more of a team event. If you win, all four of you get a medal instead of just one of you. Or oftentimes, maybe you've never won a medal. Maybe your individual times just aren't fast enough to allow you to win a medal. A good way to get a medal is to get on a relay that's got a fast runner on it. Or maybe 2 fast runners. And that's all you need to get a medal on the relay. But because you're part of the relay team, you get a medal too. Maybe you ran your typical not so impressive time, but because you're on a relay with some fast runners, you get the medal too. Relays, generally speaking, in terms of mile split and the times that appear on mile split for relay, it doesn't break it down the time for each individual runner. So if you ran some fantastic leg of a distance relay, maybe it was even a PR for you, like a 1600, you had a PR. That's not going to appear under your profile under mile split. In all likelihood, it's not. So for all intents and purposes, college coaches will never know that you ran that because it doesn't appear on your mile split profile. So in that sense, as far as college recruiting goes, the relay doesn't really impact college recruiting. It's kind of a waste of time, really, in terms of college recruiting. But it can get you a medal, and it can be a fun race. Or maybe your coach wants you on the relay because he wants points. And part of the compromise is, okay, I'll run the relay, but you let me run these individual events too. Everybody's happy, right? So there are distance relays that they can be fun things to run. I wouldn't bank on any of those relays for getting you a college scholarship, but they can be useful or fun. One of the problems, of course, is with the relay is sometimes the coach wants you in the relay, but you want to run an individual event instead, or you want to run that individual event fresh, but the relay is before the individual event, and so you can't run it fresh. Well, that's a problem. So, generally speaking, the relays are usually not particularly helpful for runners, but sometimes they can be. Maybe you run a relay the previous day, and that run that you had, that race that day, was good speed practice for the next day's race. It might actually help you run better the next day in a fresh race. So there can be good and bad aspects to running in a relay, a distance relay. But try to negotiate with your coach as best you can about your position on the relay. I mean, if you want to get recruited by a college team, you better not just run relays. You better not. Your individual time in a relay is not going to show up on mile split. You've got to get into individual races. You have to. So don't commit, recruiting suicide by only running the relay. Don't do it. And if your coach tries to get you to do that, explain to him why you don't want to do that. You've got to have individual events as well. Okay. I think that's it for the 3200 today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and maybe I can answer them in a future installment of Casual Learning, or maybe I'll answer them in the comments below. And if you like what you hear today, please press the subscribe button below. All right, thank you, and everybody, take care.